Hello and welcome to the AK Compass, where we explore new directions in travel and sustainability. I'm Carolina Tsako, communications and sustainability expert with a decade's experience living abroad and an insatiable passion for discovering new places. I'm joined by Agnes Gardoni, an accomplished journalist who regularly explores the intersections of travel and sustainability.
On this show, we uncover inspiring stories from around the globe and bring you honest, insightful conversations on travel, sustainability, and current events, always with a non-political, open-minded approach. We welcome individuals and experts from all backgrounds to share their experiences about journeying and living beyond borders.
Our sponsor is the Sweet Home Studio. Their services help us make this podcast possible. Their mission is to bring important social topics to Hungarian audiences. They also give new podcasters a special price to support more valuable content. They are based in Budapest, offering full technological support and a great space to make podcasts. We would like to take this opportunity to thank them for supporting our work.
In today's episode, we'll explore why sustainability matters now and for future generations. Carolina will help us in exploring because she's an expert on this topic as well. The numbers are shocking. Over 8 million deaths globally linked to air pollution each year. When you see data like that, what goes through your mind?
8 million people, or over 8 million people, is a very large number. In Hungary, for example, we are roughly 10 million people. 2 million of them live in Budapest. So outside of Budapest, we are losing an entire Hungary every year and year by year. And I think that's very scary. And also in Hungary, we lose 12,000 people, over 12,000 people due to air pollution. And the thing is that these people could be active, they could be part of the economy, they could be working, and unfortunately, they're no longer with us. And that's the human side. The economic side is that we're actually losing workforce, we're losing value that they could make because they die too soon.
Yeah, 12,000 early deaths a year because of air pollution, as you mentioned. This is like a population of a town in Hungary. Why do you think this still doesn't spark urgent action?
I think because they show up as individuals, not as 12,000 or over 12,000 people or over 8 million people in different countries. And also because when you think about it practically, there's a mismatch. Doctors can diagnose specific conditions such as lung cancer or other conditions that create lung deficiencies and then lethal consequences. So their information is medical. And what we are talking about is a climate and a scientific information. So it's kind of difficult to match them up because there are various medical factors. And of course, we are aware of environmental factors as environmental scientists. And I think that one of the possible mitigating factors should be and could be that medical professionals and environmental professionals actually work together to mitigate these risks. And the other solution or mitigating factor would be to use better technologies to reduce environmental pollution. Um, Also, going back to technology, it's not just carbon dioxide that is released. For example, asbestos is also used in old buildings because earlier building codes were more relaxed either, or it was not known what they are building in is actually dangerous to human health because they had preferable building aspects to them. And so if you live in or work in a building like that, you keep just breathing it in all day, and that also causes an ongoing injury to your health.
Of course, they stopped using asbestos in Hungary as well, but they are still, as you said, removing it from old buildings. So that's a tragedy if someone still might live in a building like that. but also from early deaths linked to poor air quality. These people are missing out of the market. They are missing of production. So also economists have an interest in this matter. So these people have a great value, which they don't fulfill because they die.
Yes, they have a great value as workforce, as professionals, as whatever they role they actually choose to have, and they are unable to fulfill that. Also, it's a huge personal cost. And you mentioned that the buildings are being refurbished or renovated. It's not fast enough, especially in Hungary. Most of the buildings would need to be modernized, not just because of this reason of the polluting aspect, but also because they would need to be adapted to the climate we are heading towards.
I was at a conference like a month ago, and they said that people are not willing to tidy up their attics to make insulation for their house. So it's even though they would get the money for free to make this happen. So attitude formation has a great role in this as well, as in a lot of areas you're working on. What are the most hopeful trends still you're seeing? Are there any examples of progress that give you confidence in this world?
I think that building new buildings according to upgraded building codes is definitely hopeful in terms of buildings. I think that people need to be encouraged to have a mind shift so that they understand how their home affects their health. I think there's also a comfort aspect. People don't want to go through renovation if they don't have to. They would rather move or or just leave things as they are, which is also sometimes part of old Hungarian culture that we just let things be. And that is not a good way to handle things. What gives me hope are the new type of office buildings that are being built around Budapest. For example, Budapest 1 in the 11th district is already a well certified building. So it's considered healthy. It's considered a good working environment that takes various human factors into account to increase productivity. But this doesn't solve the problem of privately owned homes. It doesn't solve the problem of privately held rentals because people just don't want to deal with the mess that it comes with.
I know that the following question I will ask would open up a greater topic, but what can, in short, what can municipalities do to be able to combat climate change more effectively?
Municipalities alone are limited in terms of budget, and also they have very few people who deal with environment because of their budgetary restraints. They have to deal with a range of problems, and usually they don't receive sufficient funding for that. So, collaboration is very important between locals, municipalities, and businesses. I'll give you an example. There's the concept of a 15-minute city. So, ideally, you would have all the services, your home, and your workplace within a 15-minute, preferably walking distance, which means that you wouldn't need a car, you wouldn't need to use a lot of public transport. You could bike, you could use a scooter. But unfortunately, it's not the reality in most cases. So people have to travel to different business districts in different cities. We also have several business districts and governmental districts in Budapest. And this kind of centralizes workplaces instead of spreading them out. And also, if somebody wants to work at a company because they really like that company, they really enjoy it, they may not necessarily move there. They might just deal with the commute, which is also a health issue. Super commuting over 90 minutes is actually dangerous to the health again. And home office is being more and more restricted, also in Hungary and globally. which makes these health friendly and carbon reduction friendly solutions less effective.
So urbanism is key, how you plan cities, but there is still space to grow in this area in Hungary as well. And a lot of municipalities have a document, a climate plan they should follow, but these are in a lot of times aren't monitored well. They don't have any numbers to follow, just vague informations. So they have a mandatory measure they fulfill, but this just doesn't work. At least this is the case in a lot of times in Hungary. You've lived and traveled at many places, to many places in the world. Do you see positive examples on this matter?
I would first go back to Hungary. So municipalities don't have ESG, but it would be worth looking into how companies and business office building owners and municipalities could work together to actually achieve these goals, because there is a push for companies to fulfill more ambitious ESG goals and go beyond them, would also be ideal, even though currently this is not really the trend. And municipalities also need to fulfill climate goals through development of their areas, their cities, their municipalities. It's just that it goes slowly because of funding. Everything basically goes back to funding. I think that in other places, every place struggles, but it depends on where they are. So just recently, I've been in Florida, but I actually just learned about this recently, that they have hurricanes, of course, it's no surprise. They have some storm surges, of course, that's also not a surprise. What was very surprising for me, that they actually built a model city, or like a village, a town, where they deliberately put lakes in different locations, and these lakes actually work as water containers, and the buildings are elevated, the roads are less elevated, so the lakes are at the lowest elevation, and they use interconnected underground channels to get the lakes fill up, and then to fill up the next one, and then the next one. And this is a good example of adapting to a climate that has hurricanes more and more often, which then prevents damage to houses. It prevents damage or mitigates damage to roads, and also protects human life. It's a town in Florida. But I know that Miami also has a system where they developed a water infrastructure system, which is developed in a way that the water goes out but doesn't come in, and that's also a good practice. But for example, New Orleans, where I lived and I also visited before and after Hurricane Katrina, they still struggle because the Hurricane Katrina came into New Orleans. New Orleans is surrounded by water from three directions: the Mississippi, the Gulf of Mexico, and Lake Pontchartrain. And basically, most of the city is below water sea level. So it's very prone to flooding. And it wasn't that the Mississippi flooded, because that's actually a high part of the city, but the lake did. And this destroyed many houses. And the development afterwards took many years. And post Katrina, I've still seen damaged buildings, damaged electrical posts that were not cleared or fixed. And I also saw that the natural defenses that exist in nature, for example, islands, archipelagos, marshlands that the New Orleans had, these were mostly gone, or they became a lot smaller. To give you an extreme example, I canoed somewhere in 2001 in the marshlands with alligators, and in 15 years later, I actually went to a restaurant in the same location because it was completely dry. And this was part of climate change, but also part of human intervention, because they built navigational canals to help ships to go through this massive Mississippi Delta, which led to salt water and also human activity dry out these marshlands. So they actually went backwards.
That's really disappointing and sad. And also, we can see in what direction the United States is going. For example, with the Paris Climate Agreement, they just opted out. But as I see in Hungary, there is a system or a way of combating climate change, which is called Sponge City, which is basically what you just said, that you have to retain water, not let it flow away. And in this matter, I see a positive trend in Hungary. So there is some light.
I would like to add that it also depends on the geographical location. So the closer you are to the equator, the worse it is. If you look at the Maldives or you look at New Orleans, the further you are, the Scandinavian countries, they have less problems. They already have emerging problems, but less problems. And the Paris Agreement is a voluntary agreement. So, yes, it's important to be part of it, but it doesn't lead to enough action even from signatories. So I think it's not really a political issue from a practical perspective, but what can be done. And in the US, they actually need to look at what towns they would save from sea erosion and what towns they would not save from sea erosion. The same problem is with wildfires, that many insurance companies are actually leaving these states or don't cover fire because they are such a high risk that it's just not worth from an insurance actuarial perspective. And there are different services that emerge that are kind of unknown in Hungary. Like you can have private firefighters if you have enough money, or you could develop your house in a way that it has water retention technology, and it also has its own firefighting technology. Otherwise, those houses can be leveled. There's a town called Paradise in California where I think one or two houses survived and the rest were gone. And we spoke about communities before, and I would also like to add that I lived in Sweden for a couple of years. There was a really hot summer, I think it was in 2013 or 14, and that was followed by a massive storm. So it ripped out bus stations, small bus stations. It flooded coffee shops, normal shops, everything on street level and below. And these institutions, they basically had to close, and they usually stayed closed for like a year because they had to get the water out, they had to fight mold, they had to get their licenses back. Some of them had locations under street level to be able to have like louder music. So that's why they were usually like on a lower level. And it took time for them to recuperate if they could. I don't think all of them could. And people lost social spaces that they liked and they loved. And even if they came back, they still had to change the interior because those were damaged. And I think that these places are hard to replace, and the sentimental value is hard to replace. And it also taught Stockholm a lesson, because Stockholm is built for snow, understandably, as a Scandinavian country, but snow behaves differently than stormwater does. So if you look at the map, Stockholm is between Lake Mälaren and the archipelago, which ultimately connects to the Baltic Sea. So you have water in two sides, and the city is in between. Most of the city is in between, and they really need to change the water infrastructure so that they can remove water pretty fast from the city, because snow moves slowly. Water from snow actually, as it melts, it doesn't create such a pressure on the system, versus versus a storm. It creates a lot of problems, a lot of water. Saw the nearest metro station being flooded to the knee. It wasn't even the lowest part where the trains are, but actually the part where you just go downstairs. And if, for example, a city like Stockholm wants to save itself, it really needs to go through a very uh, painful and long process of rethinking its entire water management.
And did they do this work? Did they learn from this experience?
I think it's a very long process because you can't just dig up a whole city and change everything, because then you just stop life. So if they will do something, or they did do something, probably it's a slow process so that the city still remains livable.
We've talked about ESG before, and also about municipalities not fulfilling their goals in their climate plan. How is this with companies? How do they doing in fulfilling their ESG goals?
From what I learned from my work and my studies was that ESG started as a leadership mind shift, that it should have changed the way we lead companies, make them more sustainable, not just environmentally, but socially and governance wise. And what I saw in Hungary in practice is that many companies, not all of them, have very low ambitions, and ESG became a very complicated system with lots of data, and people, even with low ambitions, have to put a lot of effort into data collection and into reporting. But they do this to avoid penalties. So that's a big problem, and I think that ESG is a tool, and it shouldn't be an ESG report shouldn't be the goal, but the impact behind the ESG report should be a goal that can be then transparently showcased in an ESG report, which then helps a company to become more investable, to become an attractive employer. If it's applicable to them, they could also become more green in their productions, in their services, through digitalization, through using environmentally friendly materials or reused materials. And switching to these is expensive, but I believe that on the long term, it's actually a better business idea. But you need to understand that businesses work for profit, and it's right. They have an obligation to work for profit. So they need to balance that with long-term investment into sustainable practices.
So regulation has a great role in this, meaning that if they have incentives to use like more environmental friendly technologies, then companies will invest in those technologies. This is just a simple example.
For example, it's a very good example, and I think that governments all around the world, and especially in Europe and Hungary, they should incentivize it. Companies should come together, share their best practices, because then they can help each other develop and go from ESG reporting as a task in the checklist to actually have goals and results, very important results that have serious environmental and social impact. And for this, they can always enlist the help of the community. They can always enlist the help of the municipality. They should really work together because their goal is to be resilient.
Yeah, so we've talked about municipalities that they should take advantage of companies like that to use their ESG. This is like previously it was CSR. I don't know whether it's like
No.
changes to ESG, or these are two different documents.
CSR, corporate social responsibility, was a soft approach to environmental and social issues, and accountability was lacking. And ESG was a very strong movement, which rightfully so made laws grow out of it and practices grow out of it. So it's actually a very strong tool. and companies who have to report on ESG have to keep a very, very strict compliance. But what misses from both of them is that the ambitions and also keeping them account for their plans or for their change in plans, I think that's still missing.
Can you tell us about any positive examples, an example that they used ESG exactly for what it is, for combating against climate change?
ESG is a reporting tool. What I would prefer to give examples that come from leadership ambitions rather than just ticking the box of ESG. There are several also in Hungary. I know of a company that deals with recycling trash, and they deliberately employ people who are homeless, and they help some of them to get homes, and they have jobs that are legal. They can pay their own taxes. They are equal part of society. So this is, for example, a social enterprise. Another company that has been around for several decades deals with helping both artists and autistic children. Autistic children need very specialized and individualized care. And their representation, due to their communication difficulties, is very poor in Hungary. So if you look at blind people or people with other issues that doesn't affect their ability to represent themselves, they usually have a stronger representation and therefore they have better chances at a normal life. For autistic children who become autistic adults, they don't. So there are good examples, but the management has to believe in it. And also the staff have to believe in it. So I also believe that when there are grassroots movements that the staff want something, they should be able to do it. And to give you an international example, many, many years ago, I interviewed for my diploma a bank which gave 1 or 2 days to their employees to participate in a volunteering of their choice. So there was a database of volunteering opportunities, and they could choose, and then they could get a day off to do that. I support that. The other thing that also came from management, it was actually a very good business decision as well, because this bank works in poor countries in Africa as well, that they actually researched why staff are missing from work. And they found that a lot of people are taking care of people with curable blindness, family members with curable blindness. So they invested in curing the curable blindness part. And the result was that they had less sick days off due to this reason.
Yes, that's a great and really inspiring example, what you just said. And you cannot emphasize enough that you can be profitable as a company while really caring for the environment and for the society. So that's an important point here, I guess.
My last example, because it reduces sick days for caretakers, was important because sick days are not good for the person who takes it, and it's also not good for the business because it makes their staffing just really unreliable. And so by taking this burden off of them, by finding a solution, they just became more profitable in those countries where this was a big problem, because you had people who were now able to come in, work, concentrate on work, and not worry about what happens to their sick relative.
And that's really fascinating that the leaders came to this conclusion that if their employees are well, then the company is also well and prospering. Closing this episode, if every listener could take just one action after this conversation, what should it be?
They can do many things. As private people, I think they should look into the opportunities mentioned to improve their homes if they are homeowners, technological improvements are there, and if there's also financial support, they should live with it. They should also look at various ways of commuting, because usually people who have cars, they just use cars. People who use public transport only use public transport. And I think that the combination of these should be used. So if you only go like 1 kilometer away, maybe you consider walking. Maybe if it's several more kilometers, you could use bicycles, scooters legally. So be careful with the scooters. And if you go long distances, you could choose between train, car, or at very long distances, you have to still use flights. And you can also look into refusing, reusing, recycling waste. That's also something that a private person can do. And as for companies, company leaders, people who have influence over decision making, sustainable practices appropriate for their sector should be used. Best available technologies. It's worth the investment. Reach out to communities, reach out to municipalities. They are open for collaboration, because the key to resilience is to work together and to deal with the risks. The risks are something that we know about, but also deal with the uncertainties. Those are items that we usually don't know about. But if we work together, we have a better chance at deep adaptation to the climate.
Thank you, Carolina, for sharing all these details with us on sustainability. That was it for today's episode. You've been listening to AK Compass, guiding listeners through evolving ideas, directions. I'm Agnes Gárdonyi.
And I'm Carolina Sacco. Subscribe, rate, review if you'd like to support us. Thank you for listening.